Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, we're going to start a little mini-series here today because there hasn't been a series like this lately, and so we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about it. There'll be kind of shorter videos, but what we're going to do is talk about how to get started with Linux. Like I said, there's been a lot of videos like this. I've done videos like this in the past, but there haven't been any for a while, and I think that one of the things many of us, not just in the Linux community, but in the whole world, think about is, we've already done a video on a topic. The video's there. Why bother doing a new one? Well, it's particularly important in the computer world because things move so much. I know I have a video on getting started on Linux on Windows 10. I have some videos on getting started with Linux on Mac and things like that. And most of those are still up, fairly up to date as far as how you get started, although the distros may change a little bit. So we're just going to go ahead and recap. So suppose you're new to Linux, you want to learn a little bit more about it. Maybe you want to give Linux a try. Where do you start? First place, in my opinion, that you want to start is you want to actually start by identifying the Linux distros you might want to try. Now, Linux, technically, you would find, since some people argue about this, it should be called GNU Linux. That just means it's the Linux kernel with a GUI application on top of it. We're not worried about that. Basically, what Linux is going to mean is an operating system which utilizes the Linux kernel. Now, one of the things that is challenging for new people to Linux is there's so many distributions. Inside the distributions, there's different things called desktop environments. And you don't think about this because in the Windows or in the Mac world, which is probably where most of you would be coming from, you don't have a choice of what your desktop looks like. Your desktop will look like what Windows or Macintosh determines your computer should look like. And the thing in Linux is it's so powerful because we even have these things called desktop environments. A desktop environment is how your computer is laid out versus a distribution is how the packages are delivered. In reality, what you should do is find a desktop environment that you sort of like. But there's a lot of different variations of how packages are managed. So I did a video, and I try and do one of these about every 6 months in case things change. I'm probably due for another one here soon. But this is the top 5 Linux distros for 2018. So you can see this is my top video, actually. And I'm recommending 5 different distributions in this video. You can watch this video for brief introductions to each of these. Now, I did not consider the desktops. So basically what this means is the distribution will determine how do you install packages or software. In Linux, they're called packages. Apps, software, packages, essentially all the same thing. Okay, and the 5 that I picked out here is the top. 4 of these are probably more user-friendly, maybe 3, depending on where you cross your line. But these 5 symbols here represent the 5 distros on this video. That is Peppermint, Debian, which I don't necessarily recommend for new users. It's one of my favorites. It's more complicated to set up. Ubuntu, which is probably the most common distribution, Manjaro, which has been making a lot of positive strides, and Linux Mint is my absolute favorite. This video is being recorded on Linux Mint. If you want to know what Linux Mint looks like, this is my current desktop. Now I have this, and the reason I like this is I have found with all of the different ways of doing things, I am most productive if I'm on an environment that is set up just like Windows. And so I've set up my Linux Mint just like Windows, and I get a modern desktop which has the feel of the old style Windows, which I am highly productive in. So I have, just like Windows, down here in the lower right, I have an icon that will just minimize all the windows and bring me right to the desktop. I have all my desktop icons. Well, I have other stuff back there too. But I have other desktop icons right on the desktop where I need them. I have effectively quick launch bars, not pinning things to the taskbar, but quick launch, so I can click one of these for each instance I'd like to start. I have my tasks going out across the bar. And of course, I have a menu here, and the menu is separated. And this is something that is common among Linux that have a menu, which is most of them, is that everything is divided out into different categories. Accessories. Here's your graphics. Here's your internet. Here's your office. Here's your sound and video, administration, preferences, and places is just like your places on Windows, really, where you have your documents, your music, your pictures, your video, your downloads. We also have a favorites tabs over here and a variety of different things. This is the format that I'm most productive in. Now, there are different types of Linux distributions out there, and so I like experimenting with all of the different desktops. So you can get some that resemble more of a Mac, you can get some that resemble more of the Windows, and you can get some that are just all off on their own thing, not really like any of the other ones. So that's really one of the powers of Linux. The second is the vast array of software and packages, as we call them, and how easy it is to install, where you don't have to find it or download it from some shady place online. Most of what you need is already packaged and pre-approved in your distro. All you have to do is install it. Installation, we'll cover that in another video because that could be different from different distributions. So you need to decide which distro you'd like to use. I generally recommend start with Linux Mint, okay? And then Linux Mint has 3 desktops. They're fairly similar. Cinnamon, which is one I use, they use what is called Mate. It looks like it's mate, but it is pronounced Mate or Mate. And they also have XFCE. XFCE is the lightest. If you have a low amount of RAM, an older processor, an older system, XFCE is going to run the best. Cinnamon is the requires the most hardware with Mate in the middle. Now, where do you install your computers? Well, you can dual boot, and we'll cover how to do all these in future videos. This is just a brief overview. So dual booting means that you have a true technical dual boot means that one hard drive, 2 operating systems. I do not recommend this. If you are going to do that regardless, you want to use something from the Ubuntu family. And the reason you want to use that in the Ubuntu family, is that Ubuntu has a very good installer on it that will do a very good job of putting 2 operating systems next to each other. However, it is not the best option. The problem is that when you're booting up a computer, you have your basic input output, which is what our old BIOS was called. There's a newer one called EFI or UEFI you might have seen. This loads up just the background, and then it goes into the disk to figure out where the operating system is. Well, Windows and Linux use a different, what is called a master boot record or a bootloader. Master boot record is kind of the space on the disk where the bootloader is found. What will happen sometimes is Windows and Linux bootloaders will not play well with each other. Linux has no problem with Windows, but Windows does not like to load Linux. And so that's where your true dual boot comes in mind. Now, I recommend if you are using a tower, you can generally install more than one hard disk. And so I dual boot by having a separate operating system on every hard disk in the computer. And that is really your safest way. Then you just, on the startup of the computer, you decide which disk is going to run the bootloader. And then I let the Windows thing do its thing on its own hard drive. I let the Linux do its thing on its own hard drive. That's the best way you can do it. Now, I would recommend experimenting with Linux prior to installing it because you can do that a variety of ways that you can't necessarily do on the other things. One of those is utilizing a VirtualBox. And so a VirtualBox is this program here. Now, the downside is you need to have a little bit more beefier of a computer to run this. I'm running this video on a 6-core Ryzen 5 1600. So it's designed specifically to record videos and to do all this kind of stuff, to stream and things. I specifically made it like this. I do have laptops. As long as you have a couple cores and a sufficient amount of RAM, you can run VirtualBox without much problem. And this is going to allow you to install any operating system inside the computer. And then what you can do is, for example, I'll just go ahead and start one of these guys up. It's just going to run the entire operating system on your computer as a separate machine. This is actually how almost all web servers and things work. You know, they generally all run with a variety of different tools. So this is actually Linux Mint 19. This is a new release of Linux Mint that just came out recently. And so what we can see here is it's going to boot up. And our mouse is on now. So it does want a password because that's how I have this set up. So now we are running an entire Linux distribution inside of this VirtualBox. So you can get in here, you can play around with it, you can break it, you can figure out how to install software. On this one, you just click up the software manager, and that's going to load up the application. It's going to go online and figure out which software is available. So you can just download any type of software from here without a big deal. Okay. So this is one of the best ways. Downside, you have to have a beefier computer. Upside is you can do this with no effort, no chance of breaking your system out. Okay, the next thing though you can use is you can use thumb drives. Now thumb drives can be used in two separate ways. Number one, almost every Linux distribution has what is called a live key. What that means is that you download that software, which is a .iso file, an ISO file, and you can take that and you can put that on disk. That's basically like a disk image. You can install that on a little USB drive, and most Linux distros will then allow you to go into, put this guy right into your computer, go into that bootloader when you first start the computer up, and you can tell it, hey, boot from this USB drive. And instead of going from your hard drive, you're actually going to boot your entire computer off of this. Now, that is a system that whenever you use it, whatever you do on it's not going to be saved. It's going to be wiped out every time that you close the computer down. But it does give you a chance to play with it, to figure out, hey, does web browsing work? Hey, can I check my email on this? Hey, what applications are available? You can install stuff on that live key. It just won't stick. Now, the second way you can use these is you can actually run entire Linux distributions on these as well as installed operating systems. Now, if you do that, it is important, I highly recommend you pull out the other hard drive in your computer. Because what can happen on an installation process is that it will install where you want it to install, but then what many of them try and do is say, oh, well, hard disk A is where the bootloader is at, so we're going to go ahead and write the bootloader to that drive. You will not have a bootloader on this, which means this disk will only be able to run on that computer, and if anything happens in that boot record on the other hard drive, it won't work. But if you take out the hard drive, it will see this as the only disk, and it will default to put the bootloader on this. Some installers will allow you to choose where the bootloaders go. Some of them do not. And so you have to be careful of that. So if you are installing one of these USB keys, take out the other hard drive first, and then install. That works good. Now, another downside of this, the upside, very cheap, very easy, and it works perfectly well, full operating system, and I run these for banking computers and for other stuff like that. This one is either a full Linux Mint running Budgie or it's Debian running KDE. I don't remember because I have two of these and they're identical. I have to throw it into the computer to know which one I'm looking at. Now, a downside is that they don't have as good of system performance. They're not bad. It's not a horrible user experience, but it's not as good as it could be. If you want, in my opinion, the best of both worlds, you want an external hard drive like this. I just picked up one of these today. This is a 2 terabyte drive, and you can pick these guys up for, I want to say, I think I paid $70 for it. You can actually get 1 terabyte, or you can even get 500 megabyte drives like this for as low as $30 or $40 or less. Hunt around, see what you can find. The advantage of this is this will behave exactly as an internal hard drive, particularly if you are plugging it into a USB 3 slot on your computer. You install your operating system to this, just like the USB key, pull out your first drive first, install the Linux distribution on this, and this way, anytime you want to run this computer, plug this in, boot your computer up, make sure it's running from the USB drive first. It's always going to boot Linux. And then if you want to go back to your existing operating system, then you want to pull this drive out, reboot the computer without this drive in there, I should say, and then it will boot back into your other operating system. That is very safe. This will behave exactly like your other system. There will be no system lag, no problems, no challenges whatsoever. And this is a very, very good way. In fact, I could take this guy with me with my Linux distribution on it, and I can actually go down to my friend's house, plug it into his computer, and boot up into my operating system perfectly. That is the power of using this type of method. This is for portability, one of the absolute best ways to run Linux. Okay, so now that you've figured out the way you're going to run your operating system, the next thing you want to do is figure out which one you want to run. So again, I liked my my Linux Mint. This is my favorite. Just come over here to the page, hit download, and then you'll have your three options. Now you need to know, do you have a 64-bit or 32-bit processor? If your computer is newer than 2008, you can rest assured it's probably 64-bit. If you don't know for sure, I know the biggest computer brands like HP and Dell will have a service tag number or a serial number. You can literally put that serial number into the website and it will give you a spec of your entire computer. And that'll tell you, do you have a 64-bit or a 32-bit processor? Most modern computers are going to be 64. Many Linux distros don't even offer a 32 anymore. Linux Mint still does. Peppermint still does. Ubuntu no longer does. Okay. And then just select which one you want. I like Cinnamon. That's my favorite. So you just click on this. And then you have a variety of different places to download them. So all these are called mirrors. It's all the same place. What you want to do is just grab the one that's closest to you. So depending on where you are, James Madison, there's Harvard, Oklahoma, Washington. So depending on where you're at, pick one that's closest to you because you're going to have a better download experience. Or if you have a torrent client, just click on the torrent file. That's going to download that. And then it's going to get you an ISO image. You want to verify your ISO image. So most of these distributions are going to have a link here. So just select which version you have. This is 19. And then it tells you here how to do it. So literally run SHA-256 sum. If you're already on Linux, that works. This also works on Mac because Mac has a terminal interface that operates the exact same way as it does on Linux. So you can actually do your checksum there. And then we'll actually cover how to do that in another video. On Windows, a little bit more difficult because they don't have these types of things, but there is actually a Windows plugin you can install. You can right-click the file, and you'll have a separate tag in your properties, and you can actually get your checksum from it, and you simply compare it to the file that they give you. So in this case here, this is that list of files. So when it gives you that checksum, it's going to spit out a number. Make sure that the number matches this number here. And then that's actually going to verify that the image is correct. Now what that is it verifies that the image is actually the image that you downloaded. There was one time when for about an hour or two, if you downloaded the file off of directly off the Linux Mint website, then it was corrupted. Because some hackers got in there because there was a vulnerability on their website that is now patched. So anybody who verified their image were not infected. Just make sure that those numbers match and you're good to go. If you are on Peppermint, again over here. Now Peppermint also has the option to purchase a USB right from the website. So if you just want to, if you're not completely sure, you're like, I don't know at all, purchasing USB from Peppermint is the best way to go. Be very, very, very careful if you're purchasing a USB anywhere else. There is a couple good reputable companies that make these, but you can get a lot of problems downloading them from strange sources. So don't go there if it's a couple dollars cheaper. Just come on over here. You can actually, okay, it looks like the USB sticks are coming soon. That's possibly because they just released a new version. This is a brand new version. So again, just download the version that you want. Here is your checksum. Now this is the MD5, this is the SHA, so make sure you grab your checksum, and then you can do the direct download, the torrent download, and if you really like using the operating system, please consider donating to the group. Helps the project go. On Ubuntu, of course, Ubuntu runs, their site's a little bit harder to find the downloads. I guess you can just go right to downloads. But what they have is they have cloud, they have IoT, server, desktop, alternative, and flavors. Okay, so the two you'd be concerned with here on Ubuntu is desktop and flavors. Desktop is going to give you their official download, which is going to be the GNOME desktop. That's one that is, it's a little bit more modified from the standard GNOME. That's the one that can resemble Mac if you set it up the way. They've actually set it up kind of to resemble their own thing. It's very distinctive. Not my personal favorite, but a lot of people like it, so consider that. Flavors is community releases where they have a variety of different desktops. With the exception of Kylin and Studio, these are just Ubuntu with different desktops. Kylin is a specific version of Ubuntu for China to get around some of their requirements. And Ubuntu Studio is based on XFCE, so it's like Xubuntu, but it is set up specifically to do media work. So if you are involved in audio production, video production, book production, desktop production, any of that type of stuff, Ubuntu Studio might be a good place for you to look. Other desktops, of course, Kubuntu is KDE. This is a little bit more advanced for basic users. It's really good. It's just way too many settings in some people. Lubuntu is kind of has an old feel, kind of like feels like old Windows 95. Budgie is a very modern, kind of different, unique desktop. It's a very nice desktop, one of my favorites. Mate kind of has a kind of like another kind of old style feel, but not quite as old as Lubuntu. It has a lot of options, a lot of capabilities. And XFCE is Xubuntu. This one's a very popular distribution. So these are some of the ones. And the other one I'd recommend to start with, also consider starting with, is Manjaro. That's a different family. All three of these are all in the Debian family, and they work pretty much the same. Manjaro is a little bit different if you're up for a different thing. It's based on Arch Linux, and the reason I'm not showing you their website is their website seems to be having a hiccup today, and it's not displaying for me. So I'm sure that they're working on that. But that is kind of the basics. So figure out what desktop you'd like to run, what distribution you would like to run, and then figure out from there how you're going to run it. Are you going to try it on a VirtualBox, a USB live key, installed to a USB key, or my personal favorite, an external hard drive? And then once you get that figured out, download your distribution, and then you're going to verify that distribution. And then all we need to do then is put it on either burn it to a CD, or put it on a USB drive, boot your computer off of that, and walk through the install steps. I'll show you how to do that in another video. So thanks for watching this introduction here, getting started with Linux. If you'd like to help support the channel, don't forget to check out switchtolinux.com/support for all the ways you can help support us. I do have a shop if you want to pick up a t-shirt, or I do have nice stainless steel water bottles and things like that. You can check out shop.switchtolinux.com and swing by the Patreon page, patreon.com/TomM. So thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoy experimenting with Linux.